Welcome everyone to our 2020 virtual family conference presented by Levo Therapeutics. Before we begin today's presentation, let's first thank our amazing sponsors, Levo Therapeutics, Soleno Therapeutics, Harmony Biosciences, Rhythm Pharmaceuticals, Saniona, and Novo Nordisk. Their support has allowed us to make this conference free for all of our community members, and we are incredibly grateful for their contribution. While we certainly wish that we could be together in person today, it is exciting to see how many people have been able to join us because of the virtual nature of this conference. Nearly 800 families have registered for our various sessions, and we're thrilled to be having you join us today for our session titled, What's Happening in PWS Research? FPWR is working night and day to eliminate the challenges of Prader-Willi syndrome. And today you're going to hear from members of FPWR's research team as we share some of the activities that are underway that aim to improve the care and to find treatments for PWS. So without further ado, I present to you FPWR's Director of Research Programs and mom to an adult with PWS, Teresa Strong.
Hey, Susan. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm really, like Susan, sad that we can't be together in person, but really happy to welcome everybody to this session and with the research team, give you just a high-level overview of what is happening in PWS research these days. And there is a ton happening in PWS research, so we're really glad that you can join us today and hopefully over the next few days and just get a sampling of the kinds of things that are going on. So next slide, please. So I don't have to tell anybody what an unprecedented year it has been. And like everything else, COVID has impacted research. So some research studies were temporarily paused as universities shut down and people had to go out of the lab. PWS clinical trials were impacted. And of course, our in-person, both our scientific and our family conferences were canceled. But if in the PWS world, we know a little bit something about adapting to challenging circumstances. And I think the entire community has responded in kind. So next slide. The good news about where we are today is that the research studies are largely back on track. So they've figured out how to do social distancing in the labs and stagger work, and the work has started back up. And the time out of the lab actually was used to good effect, I think. So there are many now electronic data pools that you can mine for gene expression studies and things. So a lot of the researchers spent their time doing that kind of experiments. So experiments that didn't require them to be in the lab, analyzing the data that they had, writing papers and grants. So it was time well used. The clinical trials that were ongoing all transitioned to this kind of decentralized model where they used home health visits, telemedicine to meet with the investigators, and they were able to complete all of those clinical trials. The FDA has issued some new guidance about how to do trials more remotely, and I think actually that's going to be a really good thing for our population moving forward. And despite the challenges, our community was able to complete 3 large clinical trials, which is amazing. And of course, our conferences went virtual. Again, we would love to see you in person and, sit around the bar and have a drink. But the nice thing about a virtual conference is some people who might not be able to attend are able to attend. So despite all these challenges, it's been a year full of progress. And next slide, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we've heard about over actually last week at the FPWR conference. So we're actually having 3 scientific meetings that really represents the breadth of what we're doing. We had on Wednesday and Thursday last week, we had the research symposium, and that included 20 oral presentations and more than 20 poster presentations where the scientists got to visit with each other and talk about their research findings. On Friday, we had a clinical network meeting that Caroline will tell you about. And in a couple of weeks, we'll have the consortium meeting, which is a gathering of many stakeholders, PWS patient groups, the industry sponsors, academic researchers, all trying to move clinical trials and PWS forward. Next slide. So I'll tell you a little bit, just at a very high level again, about some of the highlights of PWS research that we heard about this year in discovery science, in therapeutic development, and in genetic therapy. Next slide. So discovery science is, all of the basic science research that helps us understand what exactly is different in PWS compared to typical individuals. And there have been some really important advances this year, one of which was highlighted at the conference, and that is from Ryan Potts' group, but it was really a collaboration of many PWS researchers, many of whom have been supported by FPWR and who met and sort of developed plans at previous research meetings. So what they found, what you see on the right in the panel, is that neurons, the cells in our brains, when they make hormones, they kind of package them up into little packets, and then they shoot them out into the environment. And that's how our hormones and neuropeptides like oxytocin, like orexin, all get released. And this group, looking at mouse models, looking at stem cells that were developed with FPWR funds, and also looking at stem cells from baby teeth. So all of you who sent in teeth to Larry Ryder, thank you. That's what you see on the right hand of this panel. And they looked at them very carefully, and what they found is that in typical neurons, and that's shown on the top, you see lots of green dots. So there's lots of packets of hormones. And in the PWS neurons, and that's on the bottom, you see many, many less of those secretory granules, as they're called. So this is a basic defect in the neurons from individuals with PWS. And what it tells us is that if we can find drugs that can increase the stability and the number of these secretory granules, we have the potential to treat a lot of PWS symptoms sort of in one fell swoop. So it gives a target after for drug development, which is very exciting. We also heard from Tim Wells and his colleagues who are looking at what the neuron development within the brain in mouse models of PWS is. And what they found is that the branching, you see, it kind of looks like a splat, is different in PWS than in typical individuals. And, that's important to understand the basis of cognitive disabilities in PWS. So that's sort of highlights of the discovery. On the next slide, we'll see a lot about the clinical trials over the next couple of days. So tomorrow I'll be hosting a clinical trial panel, and I'll highlight right now Dean Carson from Saniona, who will tell you about a new clinical trial for a new drug to treat hyperphagia in PWS that will be launching soon. You'll also have the opportunity to hear back on two large clinical trials, one from Levo Therapeutics and one from Soleno Therapeutics, hear about the results of that trial, and also hear about a new clinical trial using pitolisant, which it's hoped will improve sleepiness and cognition in PWS. So all of that to come this week. On the next slide, highlight, because last year a real emphasis was genetic therapy. We got the experts together for a workshop. Since then, we funded 4 new projects in genetic therapy. We heard about at the scientific meeting last week from Jim Resnick about the development of a mouse model that's now going to allow testing of what's the optimal timing for genetic therapy in PWS. So that's very exciting work. And we continue to see the advancement of work that we previously funded. For example, this paper that just came out from Dr. Stormy Chamberlain and Dr. Mark Lalande, advancing one of the gene therapy approaches that they have been working on. So lots going on in the genetic therapy for PWS field. And finally, on the last slide, I want to end just by showing this is the drug discovery and development pathway. All the way from, on the left, research and discovery, identification of new targets, like I told you, Dr. Potts's work, all the way through clinical trials and to optimization of care, so that once we get the therapies for PWS, we're sure that they're being used in the best way to keep our loved ones healthy. Along the bottom are all the points that FPWR has to support this discovery and development pathway. And so Our goal is across the spectrum to be facilitating the research, generating resources that help all of the scientists move things forward more quickly, and just generally constantly pushing the process forward as quickly as possible. So I will now turn it over to Carolyn Vrana-Diaz, a member of our research team, who's going to tell you about the PWS Clinical Network meeting that we just had. Caroline?
Thanks, Teresa. I'm really excited that you all are attending and joining us today. I'm going to highlight our inaugural Clinical Research Network meeting that we had last Friday. We had over 38 clinician registrants from the United States and Canada. We had 19 states and 3 provinces attend. And so we just had a really good mix of clinicians, clinical researchers who came together because we really want to start a clinical network for care of PWS. So our 3 aims of this network are to, 1, establish an evidence-based standards of care across a network of providers so that all individuals with PWS can have really good access to really strong evidence-based care. We want to improve access for people with PWS to more easily become involved in clinical research. And we really want to foster collaboration between clinicians and clinical researchers in order to promote new investigations and new studies. Next slide, please. So our takeaways from this meeting are that we had a lot of interest. The clinicians and clinical researchers really want to work collaboratively in order to improve clinical care. So there's definitely a lot of interest for this network. We talked about a central repository for clinical data. That's going to be really important in order to improve evidence-based decisions. So a lot of pooling of data and pooling of clinical experience is going to be really important to make sure that we have the most amount of evidence to make these decisions that we can. And then also the involvement of families, patients, and caregivers throughout this whole process is so important. So that we really need your perspective so that we make sure that the care is what you need to be and the kind of studies that you're interested in and the kind of therapies that we can do are really important to this perspective. So that's really important, and we're going to take that to heart as we move forward with this clinical network. So the next steps that we talked about at this meeting are, 1, we sent out a post-meeting survey to all our attendees to have them start indicating which committees they want to be on and their level of interest in becoming more involved in this network. We're going to finalize a name and governance structure for this network, and then we're going to start identifying these first projects that this new network can take on. So it's really exciting work. We're looking forward to just keeping this momentum going and bringing the best care that we can to all individuals with PWS. So it was a really exciting meeting. Next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jessica Bohanowicz, who's going to talk about our global PWS registry.
Thank you, Caroline. Excited to be here and speaking with all of you. As we learn, there's a lot of new families here, and that's fantastic, and want to always welcome our returning families. My name is Jessica Bohanowicz. I am the Associate Director of Research Programs for FPWR, and I would like to just briefly give some information about the Global PWS Registry. For those of you who may not have heard of this project, I'm going to give just a brief overview. And then I do also want to give an update on some of the exciting work and projects that are starting to come out of the registry now that it has existed for a number of years. So this is an image of the landing page for the registry, the home page, so that you are familiar with what that looks like. Next slide, please. To give a quick review, the goals of the registry are basically to serve as a comprehensive database of information for everybody with PWS in the world. And obviously that is a very ambitious goal, but what we're trying to do is to collect everybody's individual story. So we kind of imagine the registry as a quilt, a patchwork quilt, and each family has a segment of that quilt. And we want to make sure that every single family is represented. Every single story is told so that we can get the best understanding of the full spectrum of Prader-Willi syndrome, all of the symptoms, the range of symptoms, the range of severity of symptoms, the full range of characteristics from infancy all the way through to adulthood. The registry is also really working to help support and expedite the completion of clinical trials by basically serving as a matchmaking service, like a dating service for clinical trials. So if a sponsor is looking for participants that meet certain inclusion criteria for a trial, they can send us that information to the registry, and then we can look for people that match those criteria and send the research opportunities out to those families. And then it's up to you as the family whether or not you would like to follow up with those researchers and participate in the study. We also, as I'm going to talk about, have a number of research projects coming out of the registry that are working to help us determine areas of needed research, areas of unmet need in research as well as in treatments. We're working to guide standards of care by trying to get a better understanding of what families are doing at home, what clinicians are prescribing for families, and what's working for families. And all of this is with a shared common goal of trying to improve the lives of people with PWS and all of their family and caretakers. Next slide, please. If you have seen any of these infographics, these are all based on data that have come out of the registry. So these have been shared through blogs, newsletters. These are shared with FPWR as well as all of the PWS patient organizations throughout the world in order to make sure that the information that's coming into the registry is being shared back to you and back to the community. This is your data, and we really want to make sure that we are providing information back to you as to what the stories that are coming into the registry are telling. So these are just a couple of examples of some of the topics that we have covered in different infographics. One that we did recently was on anxiety. We also have highlighted sleep as well as vision in PWS. We have additional infographics that we have released on growth hormone use, developmental milestones, things along those lines. We also recently released a infographic based on results from a survey that we released on how COVID is impacting all of you and your families. Next slide, please. The registry was launched in 2015, and as it has continued to grow and more data has come in and more families are participating, the amount of interest in accessing data from the registry by sponsors, by drug companies, by academic researchers has been really fantastic. It continues to grow every year. In fact, the clinical network that Caroline just spoke about, a lot of the clinicians in that network are working to develop projects that are interested in accessing data from the registry as well, to try to compare what they're seeing in their clinic versus what parents are reporting within the registry. But a couple of examples that I would like to highlight, as mentioned, one of the clinical trials that will be reported back on today during this conference is the Levo clinical trial. That clinical trial, one of the endpoints in that trial was a survey called the PADQ, PWS Anxiety and Distress Questionnaire. If any of you participated in the trial, you took that survey. That survey was developed in collaboration with FPWR and was launched and optimized and tested through the registry before it was used in the clinical trial. So that's a really great example of how even if you are not participating actively in a trial, you can still support clinical trials by supporting endpoint development. Other examples of projects that are coming through the registry, we have a number of experts, researchers with expertise in various different areas of orthopedics or sleep, anxiety, mental health, who are all actively working and analyzing data that's within the registry. One of the biggest projects that has been launched through the registry is the Path for PWS study, and I am going to pass the screen on to Lisa in just a moment so that she can speak with you a little bit more about that specific project, which is being conducted through the registry. Next slide. Lastly, I did just want to make sure that you have my information as well as Lisa's information. She'll be speaking next. This email at pwsregistry.org comes directly to me, and the Path for PWS goes to Lisa. We also have a variety of step-by-step instruction manuals with visuals on how to register, how to enroll in the registry, for those of you who may not already be participating in this project. And we also have manuals for those of you who would like to come in and update your surveys, how to go about doing that. Lisa, I would like to pass on to you so that you can speak about Path for PWS.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and welcome everyone to our 2020 virtual conference. I hope you get as much out of it as I always have in the past. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn more about PWS. So to introduce myself, my name is Lisa Matizak, and I am the PATH for PWS Study Coordinator. So some of you I've interacted with in the past. I'm also the mom to a teenage son with Prader-Willi syndrome. So I'm going to talk to you today about the PATH for PWS, which is a 4-year natural history study that began in October of 2018. This study enrolled participants in the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and requires respondents to complete surveys every 6 months regarding changes in hyperphagia, food security, PWS behaviors, and serious medical events. Currently, enrollment in the study is closed to new participants, but I'm excited to say that at inception, the goal was to enroll 500 participants, and we exceeded that by 40%, which is a real testament to the dedication of our PWS community. Next slide, please. So why is this study so important? This is a longitudinal study, which means we'll continue to collect data over the span of 4 years. This provides the ability to evaluate changes in critical PWS areas over time. Natural history studies have become increasingly important as this data will help inform the FDA of the natural history of eating behaviors, PWS behaviors, and serious medical events occurring within the PWS population. It also has the potential to inform development and clinical trial design for potential new treatments. From this study, we are learning about standards of care, what sends our loved ones to the hospital, and how to improve their needs. Thanks to a high level of compliance with survey completion every 6 months, with over 90% of the participants completing the required surveys, there's a wealth of data being collected from a very diverse population of individuals with PWS, encompassing the lifespan from school age through adulthood. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do is collect a lot of data on those serious medical events. Respondents are asked to document any serious medical events that occur that result in hospitalization or emergency visits, including uploading any medical paperwork such as discharge summaries. When a medical event is documented, the PATH study coordinator contacts the respondent to conduct a brief interview to collect as much detail about the event as possible. A report is then generated, which summarizes this information and is then reviewed by the co-investigators, Drs. Jennifer Miller and Sean McCandless. All information is de-identified. So this process allows for a clear understanding of the complexity of the event, testing that was completed, treatments that were provided, and any changes to medications. Overall, the study is providing an understanding of the number and types of events that are resulting in care that goes beyond the day-to-day needs of our loved ones. It identifies the greatest risks to the PWS population and the common treatments used across facilities. Next slide, please. So what have we learned? Since the inception of the study, 20% of the PATH participants have experienced a serious medical event, with the largest number occurring in the 18 and older population. These events encompass a number of areas such as GI issues, mental health issues, blood clots, seizures, and surgeries, just to name a few. 4% of our PATH participants have also experienced multiple events since enrollment. This study has shown that the frequency of the events does increase with age. I want to say that we are very grateful to the PWS community for their continued commitment to participating in this study, and we look forward to sharing more information back to the PWS community as the study continues. Next, you'll hear from Lauren Schwartz-Roth, who will be presenting an update on mental health and behavior. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say hello and welcome everybody here, and I echo what everyone else is saying. I wish we could all be together. I've certainly enjoyed all of the many conferences I've been to and meeting all the families in the past, but this year we're virtual. Hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to get together again in person. As Lisa said, I'm Lauren Schwartz-Roth. I'm a clinical psychologist at the University of Washington and part of the FPWR Research Team. I focus on overseeing the behavior and mental health research programs at FPWR, and I'm also mom to a 21-year-old young lady with Prader-Willi syndrome. And I'm going to talk to you today about some of the research going on at FPWR in the area of mental health and Prader-Willi syndrome. As many of us know, mental health and behavior challenges are common in PWS and can have a huge impact not only on the person with Prader-Willi syndrome, but also on the family. This year, we completed a project focused on serious mental health issues in Prader-Willi syndrome.
So it looks like we are having a slight delay in Lauren's audio and visual. So we're going to give Lauren a few minutes to get back in. In the meantime, however, we did have a couple of questions coming in regards to the registry. We can go ahead and answer some of those questions while we're waiting for Lauren to come back to us. Jessica, first, is there an age requirement to participate in the registry?
Absolutely not. So the registry is open to people of all ages and all countries as well. It's all web-based. All of the surveys are online, and so they are accessible currently only in English, but they are accessible globally, and there is no age limit of any sort.
Fantastic. So if your baby is 1 month old, you can go ahead and you can register for the registry and start participating.
Correct. The surveys are meant the majority of surveys are meant to be like a living medical record. So even if you're the parent of a 1 month old where you haven't really had that many symptoms or complications or things along those lines that somebody who's with an older child or adult may have had, basically you would still, for example, the survey like developmental milestones, fill out what has happened so far, and then in 6 months or a year, come back in and the survey will repopulate with what you already answered, and then you would just update with new information. So it's you don't take every single survey brand new each time. As I mentioned, it repopulates and is meant to sort of be a continual living, growing medical record.
Great. I know I've used the registry previously to go check back on what my medications were.
Sure.
They're constantly changing, and sometimes I have to remind myself, what change have we made? So I go back to the registry and look, oh, okay, we made these changes recently. So great resource for all of you if you haven't already registered with the registry. If someone's not sure if they've registered within the registry or not, how can they find out?
Just shoot me an email. We're happy to go in and see whether or not you are already enrolled and maybe just need to be reminded of what email address the account was created under. We can help reset your passwords. If you're not sure, we do ask, it's very important that we have accurate accounts and not duplicate information. So if you're not sure, please do check with us before just creating a new account, because that does cause some issues with data integrity if we have multiple accounts for more than one person.
Great. In today's digital world, people are often concerned about protecting their personal data. What safeguards are in place for people who are participating in the registry?
Sure. So this is an IRB approved study, which means, and similar to any of you who may have participated in a clinical trial, you would have filled out an informed consent. There's an informed consent for the registry as well. It's all online. But basically what that means is that the registry has undergone review by an independent ethics board that is making sure that the data is protected, that the participants are protected, and that the research is being conducted in a way that is protecting the privacy as well as, not just the privacy, but just the overall health of the people, mitigating risks for those that are participating within the registry. It's hosted on a platform that is managed by NORD, the National Organization of Rare Disorders, and that complies with all regulatory safety issues. We are one of over 20 rare disease registries that are on that platform, and NORD has been a fantastic partner in helping support our registry as well as other rare disease registries.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jessica. If folks have more questions about the registry, we're happy to respond to some of those questions after we give Lauren a chance to come back and finish her presentation. You can also always email Jessica directly if you have specific questions relating to your participation. I did put her email in the chat, so you can go in there, you can copy and paste it, and you can keep it handy if needed. So Lauren, you're back. We're going to give you the stage once again because we really want to hear about this guidebook that just launched today.
Thank you. Now, I was thinking earlier, like, what would be the worst thing that could happen? And I thought my internet would go out, and it did right in the middle of my talk. So I really apologize for that. It rarely happens, but it happened today. So I was talking about the mental health guidebook, and as I mentioned, the guidebook is made up of interviews that I did with caregivers whose loved one had experienced a significant mental health issue. And I also interviewed experts in the field of mental health and Prader-Willi syndrome. So the guidebook, which will be available today, as Susan mentioned, contains a lot of great information regarding mental health diagnoses, the challenges and benefits of medications for mental health issues, early warning signs to look for, as well as resources and coping tips for caregivers and parents. So take a look. Hopefully you will find some useful information in there. In addition to serious mental health problems, we know that individuals with PWS also struggle with several different behavioral challenges, particularly in the realm of temper outbursts and anxiety. And there are a few studies going on now that are targeted at reducing these behavioral challenges in PWS that I want to talk with you a little bit about. So if I could get the next slide, please. Great. So I want to talk a little bit about mindfulness for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. A previous study from a few years ago showed that use of a specific mindfulness strategy called Soles of the Feet was useful in reducing temper outbursts and aggression in a small sample of teenagers with Prader-Willi syndrome. Now, Soles of the Feet is a very brief meditation that was specifically designed to help individuals with intellectual disability regulate their emotions. The researchers doing this study, who are in Australia, Drs. Einfield and Rice, set out to do the study virtually with individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome and their caregivers. And now they've had a few participants go through their pilot project and determine that they needed to modify some of the protocol to make the study more accessible for participants with PWS. And you can see on the slide some of the current protocol. And I wanted to point out that the study is done with both the parent and the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. So you both get some training in mindfulness, which is helpful. The study is conducted remotely, as I mentioned, so it doesn't matter where you live, you can participate. And in the revised protocol, caregivers and participants with PWS get to have greater interaction with the study psychologist who has experience both in mindfulness training and in PWS. They're recruiting for this next phase of the study now, so if you're interested in getting more information, you can contact Lauren Rice. Her information's on the slide, or you can go to the FPWR website and look up mindfulness, and you'll see a lot of information about this study and how to contact the study investigators. So hopefully you will explore that. Next slide, please. The next thing I'm going to talk about are a few of the clinical trials focused on behavioral and mental health in PWS. Now, these are medication studies, and you'll get to hear a lot more about these studies as well as several other medication studies or clinical trials in the clinical trials panel happening tomorrow, which is Wednesday for anyone who's lost track of the days like I have. And that'll be at 11:30 Eastern time tomorrow. But I want to highlight two of the trials that will be starting for children and young adults with Prader-Willi focused on behavior. One is being conducted by Dr. Deepan Singh, and he will be examining a medication called guanfacine. Now, guanfacine is a medication that is already FDA approved for use of ADHD in the general population. He has been using it in his clinic and has found some good results treating skin picking, aggressive behavior, agitation, as well as anxiety in PWS with some good results. So he will be starting a trial looking at the effects of this in a research study. The other study I want to highlight is Dr. Eric Hollander, who will be looking at CBDV, which is a version of CBD without THC, kind of alphabet soup there. And he'll be looking at this medication in PWS, and in particularly the impact on appetite, behavior, and other aspects of social interaction. Unfortunately, both studies have struggled with some delays, in part due to COVID-19, but both are slated to start recruiting very soon. So don't miss out on the clinical trials panel session tomorrow to get more information about many different medication trials starting soon, focused on hyperphagia, sleep, as well as behavior and mental health. Next slide, please. So the last area I want to talk about is social skills and social cognition in PWS. So our kids with Prader-Willi syndrome are often very friendly and really want to have friends. I know my daughter does. But many people with PWS run into challenges in this area. Individuals with PWS can struggle with significant difficulties with reciprocal conversation and with relating to others, kind of understanding things from another person's perspective, especially when interacting with peers. And this really can be very frustrating to them. There's been a lot of very interesting research, however, in the last few years highlighting several of the specific issues that people with PWS struggle with in this area. And some of these studies have also shown that social skills interventions can actually be very effective for people with Prader-Willi, especially if they're modified to address the specific struggles that they have. And different interventions seem to be important at different age groups. So on Thursday morning, 2 days from now, we'll be having a fireside chat, kind of minus the fireplace and the comfy chairs, being in a virtual environment, but we'll do the best we can. And this, I think, will be a lively discussion focused on social skills and challenges in PWS with 3 leaders of research in this area. This session will also highlight what we can do to address social challenges so our kids can be more successful. And we've got a panel of some great speakers who are really leaders in this area of research as well as intervention: Louise Gallagher, Elizabeth Roof, and Anastasia Dimitropoulos. So hopefully I've enticed you to attend some of the sessions over the next few days focused on behavior and mental health research. I really feel like this area is growing in significant ways over the last few years, and hopefully I will kind of see some of you there at these sessions. And now I'm going to pass back over to Teresa.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren, and everybody on the FPWR research team. You know, all of this research is really advancing because of you. We have a great community. You guys have been, you know, contributing your data to the registry, which is so important in helping us understand more about PWS. Enrolling in clinical trials when that works for your family. There are many ways to kind of keep up to date on what's going on in the research and participate. So please visit the FPWR website, and particularly the clinical trials page, to see as new clinical trials come up. You can learn about them and see if they might be right for your family. There are also a lot of non-drug studies. If you're not eligible or you're not comfortable doing a drug study, as Lauren mentioned, the mindfulness study, there's many studies like that that are not drug interventions, but are interventions that can help our kids. You're the ones who have made all of our studies possible. We've published recently with working with academicians about the treatment preferences, what people in our community want to see treated. That's because all of you went in and did a survey with Johns Hopkins, giving that information. Many of you participated in the PWS weight study, where you provided text-based weight measurements over 6 months so we could understand what's the variability in weight over time in PWS. So all of these things are critical to really having baseline data so we can see the new medications that we hope will be coming very soon, what impact they have. So please take the time to learn about the different opportunities and participate as you can. So I think with that, we will take questions. Susan?
Thank you so much, Teresa. We've had a number of questions rolling in throughout the presentations. And so I've got a couple in the queue, but I just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions that you would like to have responded to, please use the Q&A section of Zoom, not the chat. We'll be checking Q&A. We'll be getting all of those questions in line. We're going to spend about 15 minutes answering questions. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, Teresa, perhaps you could tell us a little bit, what are some of the opportunities for developing a gene therapies treatment for PWS?
Well, I think right now we're at the very early stage of exploring different ways. We know that every individual with PWS has the PWS genes sitting on the chromosome from their mother. If they're EPD, they have 2 copies. If they're a deletion, they have one copy, but they have those genes sitting there but silenced. So there are several different strategies that are being developed using drugs, using what's called oligonucleotides, using CRISPR-based approaches, all to try to turn that on. And I think we're at the stage where researchers are just trying out different things to see what's going to work more effectively. So, you know, it'll be a little while. We have to learn things like, you know, what's the best time to do a gene therapy? Would it work in an adult, or would you have to do it in a baby? You know, what about if we only can turn the genes on in the brain and not throughout the body? You know, those kinds of questions are all questions that we want to answer before moving into a clinical trial. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. So where do you see things going in the next 2 to 3 years? I know a lot has been developed in just the short amount of time that my son has been alive for. There's so much has been happening in the last year. 2 or 3 years, where do you think we might go?
Well, I mean, I'm really excited that we were able to, as I mentioned, we had 3 large clinical trials get completed in 2020, which is amazing for, you know, a sort of a community, rare disease community our size. And of those 3 trials, one of them, the Melendo trial, did not have very encouraging results, but the Soleno and the Levo therapeutics both had some encouraging results, and they're going to be talking to the FDA about next steps. So, I mean, in the big picture, I see you know, new therapeutics coming down the line. We have to learn about how best to use them in our patient population. And I think that, you know, they will address many of the challenges that our kids have. My guess is we're going to need additional therapeutics, or there are going to be new ways potentially to address everything at once. So continuing to do development, I think, is really important to addressing the needs of the entire community and all of the challenges that our kids face.
So you mentioned clinical trials, and that there have been several that have both been completed and are upcoming. What's FPWR's role in supporting these trials?
So we support those trials in a lot of ways, not directly, right? So especially the large clinical trials, they're well beyond what, you know, we could afford to do. But there are many ways that we can be supportive of those clinical trials. So generating the natural history data, so having everybody contribute, you know, their as Jessica said, what their square on the quilt of PWS is, so that we understand how PWS normally progresses, is really important for understanding if a drug you know, is safe and effective in our population. So we also host the PWS Clinical Trial Consortium, and that brings together the industry sponsors and academic researchers and patient groups all together to talk about how do we advance clinical trials in the most efficient way possible. We have helped with the development of endpoints that are meaningful to families. So not, you know, endpoints that if you've taken the PWS Anxiety and Distress questionnaire, it's really hitting on those things that the repetitive questioning and the anxiety that our kids express. So providing a patient perspective on what the burden of disease is, what the impact of the disease is, what families want treated, you know, is all really important. And talking to the FDA. So we've done a lot of discussions with the FDA about specific therapies and also generally about PWS, so that they can understand what it is that is important to our community.
Right, and I've gotten several questions about the current clinical trials. I just want to remind everyone that we do have return of results sessions planned for Wednesday and Thursday at 3 p.m. So if you want to learn directly from Soleno and Levo regarding the data of their studies and next steps, please join us for those sessions, as well as the phase 2 study of pitolisant. They will be presenting Friday, also at 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to learn more about the specifics of that study, please join us for those sessions, and you can hear directly from the trial representatives there. Teresa, what about current drugs for genetic therapy? Where are we at in the progress for those?
Yeah, so those of you who have, you know, been to previous conferences and followed FPWR may be aware that Hyunghui Jang, who was at Duke University and now has moved to Yale University, developed with FPWR funding and additional funding a drug that activated the maternal allele in a mouse model of PWS. So that drug is being evaluated now with NIH funding in the what's called the preclinical setting. So looking to make sure that it's safe in animal models and doing optimization of the drug so that it's as effective as possible. All of those studies are ongoing, moving towards a phase 1 clinical trial in PWS or in normal individuals down the line. And I don't have an exact timeline on that because it's going to take seeing all of these studies and doing the optimization and getting the best drug to go into humans. But it is ongoing.
Right. So I think there's no doubt that our youngest families will benefit in the near term from these potential treatments. What about individuals who are 30 years old or over, the adults? What kind of improvements or benefits do you foresee for them?
Well, I think there's a lot of room for, those individuals to be positively impacted by these therapies as well. I mean, so it was not known maybe 5 or 6 years ago whether you could ever impact hunger in PWS, right? But the Zafgen trial, for those of you who have been around for a little while, that drug was found to be effective in adults with PWS. So it reduced their hunger, and it was quite effective in reducing their hunger. Unfortunately, it had a side effect that was fatal in a couple of the trial participants. So that's not a drug that can move forward because of that side effect. What it did tell us, though, is that these characteristics of PWS, the hunger, can be treated in adults with PWS. So it was the first time that anyone had shown that you could actually impact these. And I think like the Levo's drug, carbetocin, is reducing. I'll let them talk about their results, but they've seen some reduction in anxiety in teenagers with PWS. I would think a next step would be to look at older adults. And the Soleno drug, the diazoxide, also was tested in adults, and they'll be showing, and they have shown, improvements in body composition, for example. And that's really important in our older adults so that they can stay healthy, they can keep exercising. It's kind of they get into this. It's easy to get into sort of a downward spiral of less activity, less muscle mass, which is happens naturally in PWS. And if we can push them back to being more active, it's just really going to improve potentially their overall health. So I think there's a lot. I mean, I am so glad that the babies that are being born today will have, many new therapeutic options. But I think the adults with PWS are really have the opportunity to have some really positive impacts as well.
Fantastic. We have more questions coming in regarding specific drug trials, including Saniona's study of Tesame. I'd like to just encourage all of you to join our session tomorrow morning, the clinical trials panel, because Dean Carson will be joining us from Saniona. He'll be speaking specifically to that drug study, and you can ask questions directly to him. He's in the best position to be able to answer questions regarding that study. How about kids under 5? So, Lauren, a lot of research has been done recently about behavioral interventions. What have we learned about what to watch for these kids, particularly in relation to social and emotional areas?
Well, again, I encourage you all to attend the fireside chat on Thursday. Anastasia Dimitropoulos has done some really great research that was published recently looking at, in particular, that kind of younger age group, the preschool age group, and social and kind of play challenges in that group. And they've designed a specific intervention that was done virtually that was shown to help some of the children in terms of their social and kind of emotional development skills. So we're learning that a lot of those kids do have challenges at that age, but they are amenable to change and intervention.
So clearly FPWR has been working closely with a number of our industry partners to help with educating families about opportunities, etc. How does FPWR ensure an absence of industry bias in our research agenda and research results?
So that's a great question, and we do that in many ways. So FPWR has always been a family-led organization. Our families provide the vast majority of funding for all of our studies. More than 90% of funding comes from families who are fundraising and donating to FPWR. We do accept some industry support for specific things. So for support of the conference, so that everybody can come to the conference for free, to the virtual conference. For supporting education about clinical trials so that people can learn about clinical trials. And the main place that industry support goes is to our PWS Clinical Trial Consortium. So the consortium is a group, as I mentioned, of industry partners, academics, so researchers, and patient groups working together in the pre-competitive space. So working on things like understanding the impact of PWS on individuals, which the FDA wants to know when they're considering drugs for a population. Working on things like improving the endpoints. So are there other ways, more quantitative ways, aside from the HQCT, which many of us know is a measure of excessive eating in PWS. And so the industry funds go to those kinds of studies that will support clinical trials in PWS. In addition, we have written policies on how we interact with industry, which outlines our basic principles of that we treat everybody the same, that we don't sort of advance any of our industry partners. Our role, as we see it, is to give that information to our families and let families decide if they want to participate in a clinical trial. So we always say that, and we have written policies about how we practice that in everything that we do.
Lauren, would you like to add?
I want to add actually something to the previous question about the younger kids. I just want to clarify that for the mental health guidebook, I interviewed families who had kids 10 years and above. Serious mental health issues are very rare in Prader-Willi in young children. And really what we saw, as you'll find if you look at the guidebook, is we see more issues in kind of that pre-adolescent, adolescent phase. And Patrice Carroll's going to talk right after us, right, today. So she will also, I think, has a lot of experience in helping with behavioral issues of the younger children. But again, serious mental health issues tend to come later. So
I was going to wait to the end of the presentation to talk about those next two sessions, but I think it's a great lead-in, Lauren. We have two excellent speakers coming up later today. Patrice Carroll will be talking about how to remove some of the barriers so that you can have improved behaviors with your loved ones. For those of you who've met Patrice Carroll, you know she's a dynamic speaker. She really cares about people with PWS, and she has some great behavior tips. If you've never seen her speak, you really want to attend that session. I would suggest, however, that if your child or loved one is under the age of 5 and you're not observing behavior challenges at this time, I would recommend going to the diet and nutrition session rather than behavior. If you are like me and your child or loved one struggles with anxiety, I highly recommend Dr. Singh's presentation later today. He's going to be deconstructing anxiety for us. He's going to be telling us what anxiety looks like, how it might manifest, and he'll be giving you some tips for what you can do about it. So if anxiety is among your top challenges, do not miss this session, 3 p.m. Eastern today. With that all said, let's get back to our Q&A because we've got a lot of them. Teresa, this question is probably best for you. How about our international collaborations? What is FPWR doing on an international level?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, especially for rare disease, international is really important. So we are an international organization. Our scientific advisory board has clinicians and scientists from France and Germany and Canada, and we support our approach has always been to support the best research around the world, right? So if someone and we've supported projects, I think in 13 or 14 different countries. So if somebody's doing really excellent research in Germany or in England, we're going to support it there. And, we work closely with investigators overseas. We like to involve families internationally. And I'm on the scientific advisory board of the Prader-Willi Research Association of Australia. So there are many different ways in which we support and encourage international research. And I think that's really critical for a rare disease, because we need the experience of everyone all over the world. And of course, there's IPSA, the International Prader-Willi Syndrome Organization, which has, a long history of working internationally. And, we talk with them quite a bit and collaborate with them, and we're really supportive of their work. And they are also members of the PWS Clinical Trial Consortium. So we have that link as well.
A lot of our families are really interested in genetic therapy because it has the potential to be transformative for our loved ones with PWS. Particularly, we get a lot of questions around CRISPR technology. Where can our community get more information about genetic therapies and CRISPR as it relates to Prader-Willi syndrome?
So I hope from the FPWR website, and if you can go back and look at the fireside chat from last year, which is on our YouTube channel, which has Stormy Chamberlain and Jim Resnick, who are two leading researchers in PWS genetic therapy, who are, talk about some of the work that's going on, and report on a workshop that we had with leading gene therapy scientists. I think the CRISPR technology is one technology that is really promising, but I think there are many other technologies as well. So we are supporting work in the using CRISPR technology to develop genetic therapy for PWS, and we are also supporting different approaches. I think we're at the stage that we don't know which one is going to work the best. There's certainly some powerful technologies out there, and we definitely want to be investigating them, but we don't want to just entirely focus on CRISPR when there are some other possibilities as well. So, these, for example, we're just supporting a new investigator who is at Duke University in the Gershbach lab. The Gershbach lab is, one of the leading CRISPR technology development labs in the world. And so to have this individual working on PWS in that setting, I think is really exciting. So I think we definitely are looking at that. We definitely are supporting that. We're definitely interested in seeing it move forward, but we're looking at other approaches as well, because I think we need to at this point. We just don't know what is going to be the best approach.
So we're going to go into greater detail about drug development tomorrow, but perhaps you could give us the 30-second explainer on what happens after a successful phase 3 trial. What is a generalized timeline? And will these treatments, if approved or if successful, will they be approved worldwide or only in the United States? What will the availability potentially look like?
Right. So typically a drug goes through phase 1, which is a very small study just to see if the drug is effective. And in the rare disease community, that might be, 10 or 20 individuals. Then it goes to a phase 2, which in the rare disease community would also be pretty small, maybe up to 50, 60 individuals. And in phase 2, you're making sure it really is safe, and you're also looking to see whether it's efficacious? So does it do what you think it's going to do? Does it have the desired effect? If all that goes well, you go into phase 3. That's typically a much larger, it's often called a pivotal trial, because you're trying to get the drug company is trying to get the information that they want to take to the FDA and say, look, our drug is safe and effective in this population, and we want an approval. So when a company is done with the phase 3, they will meet with the FDA usually and talk about, you know, whether it's time to submit an NDA. There's so many acronyms in the FDA, it's crazy, but a new drug application. And if they get the signal from the FDA, if they feel like it's time to submit the NDA, then the FDA will review that. It can take 12 to 18 months for rare diseases. If they have certain designations, you know, they try to shorten that up if you know, it's a rare disease with serious and life-threatening consequences, which I think the drug company would argue PWS is. And so at that point, if they got approval, then that's when physicians can start prescribing it to the general population. Now that is US. So it is only US, and then different countries have different rules about whether you would have to repeat those studies within that country, whether you could use the data from the US to support you know, prescriptions in a different country. So every country, unfortunately, is different. Europe goes generally through the EMA, the European Medical Association, or EMA, whatever it stands for. And so there's some harmonization there in the European countries. And we would still, and we're already starting to think about this, there's still the issue of insurance companies paying for the therapy. So that's a whole nother hurdle that we're going to have to deal with, and that we're working towards getting the information that we need so that if a therapy is approved, then the insurance companies pay for it. So many steps to go. I would say and you should ask, again, you should ask Levo directly, you should ask Soleno directly what they envision their timeline to be. But I think they'll be making decisions about whether to submit their new drug application, and then it will be 12, 18 months before we would see approval. That's my understanding of it. Again, they'll have a better sense and they'll be able to give you a more direct answer, perhaps.
Great. So come to the clinical trials session tomorrow morning, and come to our return of results sessions Wednesday, Thursday afternoon for more information on that. Lauren, how about cognitive challenges? Has there been any research happening to look more closely at those challenges, specifically related to short-term memory deficits?
I mean, that's an area where there has not been quite as much research in Prader-Willi syndrome. There has been research in some other neurodevelopmental conditions that I think we can look towards, but that's really a hope of ours to focus on the next year or two, because I do think that's really important for us to start to understand some of those variety of learning and cognitive challenges that our kids have. The social skills issues that I was talking about earlier in the panel that we'll have on Thursday, we'll talk some about that in terms of social cognition, which is really the interplay of kind of social skills and cognition, and our understanding of social interactions in the world, which our children do struggle with in terms of understanding other people's perspectives and other people's emotions. Even facial expressions sometimes can be challenging for our kids to interpret, and that does have is related to intellectual and cognitive challenges. So I think we're starting to understand more about all the different areas that it's impacted, and I hope that in the next few years it's going to be a focus of ours to try to kind of push the research forward in that area.
Sure. So we've been getting to hear some in the standard news, you know, vitamin D deficiency can lead to depression in typical people. What do we know about Prader-Willi syndrome? Are there other deficits like vitamin D or B12 that could be leading to mental health challenges? Could we prevent those mental health challenges perhaps by supplementing early?
I don't know much about vitamin D in mental health, although I've heard of some studies in the general population where they look at vitamin D and kind of energy levels and things like that. There has been some research for the last decade or so looking at people in the general population who are at very high risk for psychosis because of like family history or some other genetic predisposition. And treating them with omega fatty acids, fish oils is what we all might be familiar with, and looking at kind of, is there a way to mitigate onset of psychosis and other serious mental health issues in that very, what they call ultra high risk population. And I've been interested for a while in whether that might be something to look at in Prader-Willi syndrome. But there has not been any research to date in that area. But I do think that that could be another avenue to explore for sure.
And Susan, if I can just add to that, I think there has been some work, Andrea Hack and others have been looking at, vitamin deficiencies in individuals with PWS because they're often on such a calorie restriction. They may not be getting all the vitamins that they need, including B12 and vitamin D. So I think it is really important to supplement as needed, talk to a dietitian, because, those deficiencies can impact mental health and physical health as well. So it's a real risk for our population.
There is some research kind of related to that, Teresa, in Prader-Willi, looking at the microbiome, starting to look at some of those issues, which is certainly related to nutrition and diet. So I think we're going to see more about that in the next few years for sure.
Yes, I agree.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for answering the attendees' questions today. There was quite a few of them. We got through most within the time that we had available. I would just like to close this session by saying one thing, or maybe a few things. One, we need you. Teresa, at the end of her presentation, went through quite a list. I can bring it back up here, perhaps if I can get my slides to work. There's a lot of ways that people in our community can get involved, and we truly need all of your involvement in order to keep moving research forward. So if you haven't enrolled in the registry, please do. Please continue to learn about clinical trials and if they're right for you and your family. And if you are so able, we would really love your financial support, whether it's a donation or fundraising, so that we can continue to keep this research moving forward. As a mom of an 11-year-old with Prader-Willi syndrome, I'm never going to be happy until we have found treatments for every single one of his challenges. And I know we can do it, but it's going to take all of us coming together to make that happen. So if you could, please join us the rest of this week for as many sessions as you are able. Today we have Optimal Nutrition for People with PWS. This is going to be presented by Melanie Silverman. She's an amazing speaker and a fantastic nutritionist. I highly recommend that session if you're looking for tips on how to have a better nutrition plan for your loved one with PWS. Also at that same time, 1:15 Eastern, again, is Patrice Carroll. She's going to talk about moving the barriers for improved behaviors. Highly recommended if your child is over the age of 5. All right. And finally, the end of the day today, 3 p.m. Eastern time, we have Dr. Singh, who will be addressing anxiety. So join us for these sessions, get registered, and we will see you again later today. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, speakers, for your fantastic presentations.